Welcome into another episode of Everything is Logistics, a podcast for the thinkers in freight. We are proudly presented by SPI Logistics, and I am your host, Blythe Brumleve. Today, we got a very special guest for you today. It is the VP of Sales, Chris Fields, over at Zelh Logistics. So I'm excited to have this conversation because the sort of the elephant in the room is you spent 15 years at TQL. Now you are working for Zelh for a few months now. And so it's an interesting dynamic of what's going on in the freight brokerage world. So I'm excited to sort of talk through what you think the evolutions that need to be happening based on your experience of working in a big time freight brokerage and where you think this segment of the industry is headed. So Chris, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it, and I hope people don't stop listening when they first heard that I was there for 15 years. You know, I said this to you earlier, Blythe. There's good, bad, ugly opinions about the company, and I feel like I was one of the good ones, and it was due in large part to the carrier relationships I had. Really transparent with my carriers, and I think it was a mutually beneficial partnership. So.
Well, hopefully, yeah, no one, either you turn the volume up when you hear TQL or you just immediately shut it off. So hopefully people are turning the volume up anytime you hear that name, because obviously you become the top dog for, good and bad reasons. And hopefully the good outweighs the bad.
Right.
But there's a lot of debate around that topic. Regular Everything is Logistics listeners will probably have heard the conversation with Matthew Leffler, who broke down a lot of the interesting, the interesting ruling that came out recently with TQL versus the classification of salary versus non-salary positions, especially within the freight brokerage world. I was an executive assistant. I was never a freight broker, but I sat next to the freight brokers on the brokerage floor at a logistics company about 10 years ago. And it was very much, especially working in marketing, it very much was, okay, we're going to go to the different schools that are in the area. We're going to recruit those fresh-faced college graduates, and we're going to sit them down, and we're going to make them pound the phones on all the cold leads that the other experienced brokers never had access to. And that sounds like a lot of or not a lot, but it sounds like it's a typical freight brokerage model, not just for the company I worked at, but also for TQL. Is that a safe assumption across most freight brokerages?
For the big box 3PLs, yes. I think it's become a volume play. And when I first started there in 2008, I don't think that was the case. And I'll tell you this, I applied and got turned down on my initial interview. They said, we're not interested.
Oh, wow. Do you know why?
The recruiter just said, probably not a good fit. And that really fired me up. So the next day I applied again and I said, no, we're going to talk. And so, I lasted 15 years and it was a great career, but that just shows that, back in 2008, 2009, they were a little more selective. And I think all of the big box, the CH, Coyote, they were all a little more selective. And now it's just, we need bodies in the door.
And so what are those bodies taking care of right now? Because, you hear a lot, or I hear a lot about, sort of tech revolution and tracking and visibility. And, it sounded like buzzwords for years. But to pick up another story that's been going on in freight is the digital freight brokerage. And they're going to eliminate the role of the freight broker. And, you create this instant visibility for all of your shipments. What do you think that the bodies in the seats are taking care of now at major freight brokerage? Is it, tracking and tracing? Is it, still a combination of, the digital freight brokerage model versus the traditional freight brokerage model?
Yes, I think if you lean too far in one direction, it's a problem. I think that hybrid of get the really smart tech people in there to automate what can be automated, but then you still need that human element. And you still need, because drivers still like talking to people. They don't want a text messages and text back and say, hey, I'm loaded or I'm unloaded. They still like to pick up the phone and talk to people. And I think those that find that balance of tech and human interaction are the ones that will excel the most.
And so as you spent 15 years at TQL, how did your role evolve? Did you start off with being, the butts in the seats and pounding, the cold calls? Did you start out in track and trace it? Tell me a little bit about your time and how your role evolved.
Yeah, so I started out as an assistant on a large account, and I got to train on that account for 20 weeks or so. And then they said, okay, here's a desk and good luck. And I didn't plan to stay very long. I said, but if I'm going to do this, I'm going to make more calls than anyone else. I'm going to stay on the phone more, and I'm going to figure it out, or I'm going to fail. And so I did that. I made thousands and thousands of phone calls. And then I said, you know what? I'm pretty dang good at this. And so I built a book of business myself. I, had assistants on my team. I built a large team. And then from that point, I think this was probably a mistake I made, is I went into management from there. And your best salespeople aren't always your best managers, and vice versa. But that was just, 28-year-old Chris going, all right, well, that's the next step. Let's go into management. And so I went into management and started building a team. In 2010, I actually started their Tampa office with 6 people, and then grew that to 250 people. So, and it's still one of their most successful offices.
So did you go back to sales, or did you stay in the, obviously you stayed in the management side of things?
So I was in management for a bit, and then we found a role. They said, well, let's get Chris in front of some of our large accounts. Let's get him back into selling a little bit. So I traveled, 35 weeks out of the year, visiting some top accounts and saying, here's what we're doing right. Here's what we're doing wrong. Let's tweak it here. And oftentimes I would meet up with a sales rep. It was his account, but they were a little more green. And they said, get Chris in there with him, and let's make sure we're doing a good job. And some of those stories of seeing a green rep visit a customer and they've never been on a customer visit. There were some funny little stories there.
What is a green rep?
Well, one that just started, that had landed a big account, who they were great on the phone, but when they put them in a conference room with 15 or 20 executives at a large Fortune 500 company, they didn't know what to say.
Oh, they're going to eat them alive.
Yes. Yeah, they really did.
So what were some of those key differences that made you say, "Ooh, I don't know if management is right for me"?
It can be a bit of babysitting, depending on what your team is like. You hear about the girlfriend and boyfriend breakups and all the noise outside of it. And I said, I just want my salespeople, and I want to sell, and I want to drive revenue. But there's a lot of noise that goes along with it. And I think there are good managers and good salespeople, and you gotta kind of find your swim lane.
For sure. Now, for with your experience with TQL, I mean, obviously they're one of the top dogs in freight. There are obviously some stones that people are throwing, trying to punch up, things like that. But what are some of the good things that you saw? Because you don't get to one of the top brokerages in the world without doing some right thing or doing some correct things.
Absolutely. Yeah, their training is top notch.
Why do you
and
say
they are very upfront from day one, and they say, this is what the training will entail. We're going to give you the tools to succeed, and what you do with those tools are up to you. And I took those, and like I said, there was a lot of hard work, but I was one of the top brokers for years at their company. And if you needed help or you needed more tools or support, they were there for you. And like you said, you don't get to $8 billion by accident.
Right. And I think for a lot of just the role of the freight broker in general has just been, it feels like it's done a lot of evolution in the last year or so relative to the previous 15 years. Is that a safe assumption?
I think the landscape is changing now. I think there are a couple of things. That ruling is going to affect how people hire moving forward. Because a lot were saying, well, they got here by doing this, I can replicate it. And now that's going to change. I think the advance in tech is going to take a lot of busy work off brokers' plates. So I see us moving towards more of an agency model, and especially the remote staffing that has gotten so popular in Latin America, Philippines, us in Eastern Europe. I think it's going to be more of an agency, give them everything they need to run, and kind of remove your liabilities a little bit. I know Uber just started an agency program, and there's several other large ones that are doing really well in a tough market.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely makes a lot of sense. And I've had this conversation on the show before. I mean, obviously, spoiler alert, SPI Logistics is a freight agent network,
Yep.
proud supporter of the show, which has, allowed me to be able to explore these stories more in depth and try to find where, the bright spots are, especially in a tough market. And the freight agency model just feels like it's one, I think it's one of, I hate to call it like a hidden gem, but it
Yep.
still feels like a hidden gem in the world of brokerage industries where you can have these top dogs who, like SBI, who has the tech and the solutions and the IT teams and, the HR, the back office, all of that important thing. And then you can have the people who have the relationships with the customers, with the carriers. And I think that I think you're right. I think that that's a very hidden entrepreneurial opportunity in freight that not a lot of folks are paying attention to.
You're right. I don't think everyone knows about it. And just the model itself of take the accounting off their plate, take the tracking and tracing, dispatching, and just let your salespeople sell. And then let our folks who are good. I was terrible at accounting. I should not be doing accounting.
Same.
So let's take that off Chris's plate and your plate and let them do what they're good at. So I think it's only going to get more popular. And like I said, Uber announcing their program and then several other large ones. And the ones that have been doing it, like SPI and your Global Trans and those that have been doing it for years, I think are poised to kind of surge ahead.
And I think too, because that's one of the lessons that the industry has kind of had to learn the hard way. I'll invite people if you want to get into sort of, the lawsuit details, things like that. The ruling that just came down with TQL, in addition to the Convoy closure, the Yellow closure, the Slink.io, like all of the drama with them. There's a lot of just sort of like a come to Jesus moment for the freight industry. And it feels like this meeting of technology and where technology plays a role along with the relationships. And I think that the relationships is something that has gotten lost with the rush to tech adoption for a lot of these companies. And so I'm curious for you, like you have been at Zelh for 4 or 5 months now, I believe. You just recently joined the team, and as we're kind of evolving into these sort of outsourcing models, especially when it comes to freight, it feels like that. I've learned about a new outsourcing company, a few of them already this year. Is that sort of what you see as almost the future of a lot of traditional freight brokerage roles?
I do. The concept itself, it's nothing new. Several have been around for a few years, and they're doing a great job. They are primarily in Latin America and the Philippines, and that's what drew me. Well, a couple of things drew me to this team. Is we're primarily in Eastern Europe, and I was so used to 60, 70% turnover. And when I started meeting the staff that we have and the work ethic and the education and experience level, I said, if we had had this, we could have done even more. So I think there's something there. And when you get single digit turnover from a company in roles like this, and they look at it as a career instead of a 23-year-old who had 1 foot out the door the day he started, it makes a big difference. And I think you can really compound the revenue using this model.
And so when you talk about sort of the education, the lack of turnover, what does the employee base that works in freight brokerage, are they working in brokerages all across the world, or are they dedicated employees for freight brokerages in the U.S.? What does sort of the high level outlook look like? And then let's drill down to the employee itself.
I think you can do a couple of things. I think you can do exclusive staff for a company where they only work for that company doing some back office tracking and tracing, whatever it may be. I think on the agency side, you could do more of a flex model where you may have 4 or 5 agents who don't have enough book of business to support an individual or a team by themselves, but together, maybe one has West Coast freight, the other East Coast freight, or after hours. And then you have a team that just flexes across accounts. And I love that model. I don't think a lot are doing it right now. And it's something that we've started to do. And I think it's a great option.
And then from the employee side of things, you mentioned the education, the lack of turnover.
Yeah.
What is it about the educating Eastern European employees different from U.S. based employees?
Okay, let's think of the Midwest carrier market, Chicago in general. Large, I think it's 23, 24% Eastern European carriers in Metro Chicago. So think about if you're negotiating rates or you're building a carrier network, but instead of Chris or Blythe calling these carriers, it's someone who speaks Polish, who has been in the industry for 3 or 4 years. I think they're going to have a better relationship than you or I could get, and maybe better rates. Maybe they pull more loads for you, those kind of things.
And that's interesting you say that, because there are a lot of companies that, especially there was one woman that I worked with, and she had a whole network of Russian drivers and Russian carriers that would work with our company because she spoke Russian, and she was able to have a conversation with them and develop that relationship with them just simply based on the language, where
Yes.
I would almost think, like, perception wise, for some carriers, some customers, if they call somebody and they hear an accent, they're going to get frustrated. Whereas
Yes.
I think it's the opposite with what you're referring to, where it's almost a bonding moment. Is that a safe assumption?
It is. I'm from Kentucky, and when I would call Kentucky carriers, it was great. But when I would call the Bronx, it wasn't. It didn't work out so well.
Yeah.
But absolutely, you're spot on. And others have noticed the same with the Spanish-speaking side. You know, when you're covering loads in the Southwest, there's a little bit of trust already built in there, and we've noticed better margins, better relationships, and just more carrier satisfaction. And with driver turnover being such an issue right now, I think it can affect that as well. It's like, hey, I like working with them because I have relationships with their after hours team.
And so, with a lot of the outsourcing I've personally dealt with, it's more on like the marketing and web side of things, web development, that kind of, technology side of things. But for outsourcing in logistics, specifically freight brokerages, what are some of the, we've talked about some of the benefits, but what are some of the dangers that people should be looking out for if they're thinking about taking that leap?
I would make sure that it's not a situation where they're just placing bodies for you. I would want to be involved in the interview process, the selection process, speak to those people, and you make the decision. Not, I'm looking for a dispatcher, okay, here's one. But rather, give you 4 or 5 options and have you make that decision. I would be skeptical of work from home. I'm not a big fan of it, especially if remote. I'd prefer them to be in office on webcam when necessary, and then setting the shifts myself.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, because especially with the movement that we've heard over the last couple of years of hybrid versus, back in the office, there's a big debate going on. But you're in the camp of everybody should be in the office.
I think so, and it's tough. I'm saying that, and they're going to be, well, they're 8,000 miles away. Well, usually we build teams, and they're all in the office together, and there's still that camaraderie there. So I just think it's a plus compared to someone being at home and not on webcam.
What do you think are some of the other benefits of working in an office environment versus, just working solo?
The lessons you learn and the energy. We all worked through COVID from home, I'm sure a lot of us. And I mean, it got pretty dang boring sitting there. And then I was like, I want human interaction again. So
my brother actually got a job specifically picked a job to go work because he lost his job during COVID, unfortunately, but he specifically picked a job that was in office because he was sick of staying home.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I believe it. And it's just the things you hear, maybe somebody 2 desks over tried something that you would have never tried and it worked, or they said something really bad and you go, don't ever do that. Just the lessons you can learn being around people, I think is a big deal.
For sure. And I mean, for me, I love working from home, but I have a different role. I'm not, a freight broker. But
Right.
some of the best times or some of the most interesting things that I ever learned was being an executive assistant at a 3PL and working at a magazine where you can just, number one, the working at a 3PL was definitely the experience of hearing all of the drama, hearing all of the things that are going on, brokers yelling at drivers and vice versa,
Right.
management, arguing with each other. There's all those different dynamics, people very passionate about what they think and what they feel. And you probably wouldn't hear that at all if you're
Right.
all working from home.
Yeah, and I mean, if it's accounting and where you need a quiet environment and you need to be very correct on your numbers, and that's okay. I get it. But if it's more of that sales side of things and support, I like being together in an office.
Now for you, backing up just a second, because I'm curious about this. So, with spending 15 years at TQL, what was sort of the catalyst for moving on to Zelh?
I'd been talking to the team. So the founding team here at Zelh all have been in the industry for a decade plus. And that appealed to me. I said, so they know what they're talking about, whether it was with Transplace or Uber, just a solid founding team. That and combined with the model itself of, wait a minute, why isn't everyone doing this? When they first told me about it, I said, let me look into it a bit. I got to speak to a few of the staff. I got to see the resumes, and I said, this is genius. This is what we need to be doing. And the landscape changing as I think it, maybe I'm wrong, but I think it's shifting right now. And I think this is a big piece of it. I was happy there. I could have stayed another 15 years. But I think it's just a new era we're entering. So
why do you think more freight brokerages haven't started outsourcing yet?
There's a lot of skepticism. I don't think there's enough education. I also question the talent level, and that's not a knock on anyone who's been doing it for years. They've been doing it a lot longer than I have. But if you're looking for data entry, clerical work, I think it's fine to look at other options. But if you're looking for customer-facing, customer interaction, I would want to be very selective about who you work with. And that's what appealed to me with, we don't have to tell these people what a dry van load is or a flatbed load. They know and they're ready to go. And I think that plug and play aspect is really, really beneficial.
You mentioned earlier about the education and the training for a lot of the Eastern European employees. I'm curious as to maybe what they grew up learning about transportation versus the intricacies of the U.S. brokerage market. Are there any?
You would have to, it varies depending on, but a lot have worked for U.S. brokerages in the past, but then others work for European trucking companies. So just the terminology's similar. The laws and regulations are a bit different. But would you rather have, it pains me to say this sometimes, but the work ethic of some of the recent college graduates for these entry-level roles here in the States is not the best. So would you rather have someone with experience that could learn your operation in a week or two and ready to go, or someone that you really have to train all the nuances of the industry? So
what are some of let's just say, in 3 years, most of the freight brokerage industry, the market's back. You've had these sort of market fluctuations sort of balance out. What do you think a modern freight brokerage looks like in the U.S. in 3 years? What are those main departments that are in office in the U.S. versus the roles that they're outsourcing?
It was euphoria there for a couple of years with rates through the roof, everyone buying trucks. And I think people have forgotten how good of a couple of years it was. And now we're just coming back to reality, I think. And brokerages moving forward, I think, are going to be more efficient, a little bit more lean, and focus on quality people in all departments. I want the best salespeople that I can get. I want the best back office. I want the best accounting. And I think the days of just, here's an open role, just hire as many as you can. The amount of money spent on recruiting teams is absurd. And that combined with the time wasted on interviews and sourcing candidates only to have them leave after 6 months, that's not doable for a long term. And I hate seeing companies going out of business now because of decisions like that being made. I think they could have been prevented.
It's definitely like demoralizing too. You spend all that time and energy and money to, get a new hire through the door. And then if they're gone, with that turnover rate that you mentioned, it's very demoralizing, and you just have a bunch of employees that are being overworked, and they
Yes.
probably won't last as long either because they're tired of doing all the grunt work.
And on the other side, you have a couple in that group that are really good, and it brings them down. Going, "Look, this is not a great environment to be in," and you want to motivate those A players, and I don't think a lot of that's happening.
So, with all of your experience at TQL, especially with on the sales side of things, I'm curious with your role now, VP of Sales over at Zelh. Are a lot of those sales practices the same for you? Is it just or does it just change your business card, or are you doing the same sort of, I guess, sales structure, the same sales philosophy, just the name has changed?
No, not at all. So I'm not, all of our employees are in Eastern Europe, and all that I do now is add to this founding team that, like I said, came from Uber, Transplace, and that brings a lot of credibility. So when we talk to a company and we say, "Hey, we built teams. We've been in your shoes. We know what to do and what not to do. And we offer up this solution, and we'd love to talk through your current operation, how it works, and maybe if you tweak here or try something here, add a person here." I think it brings a lot of value to the team. It's refreshing. I'm excited.
What are some of those mistakes that brokerages are making when they're trying to scale?
I think the recruiting team that I mentioned, I think is a lot of wasted resources there. A volume play. I think you need to be more selective in who you hire for your salespeople, and consider other options, and don't get stuck in that. Well, we've always done it this way. Let's keep doing it this way. So, there are different models across the country, from your cradle to grave to ones that just focus on customer relationships and hand things off. So, find out your identity, who you are, and hire the right people.
And then outside of that, how do you, I guess, think about sales and marketing when it comes to Zelh? Is marketing a focus right now, or maybe a focus in the future? How do you guys think about the sales and marketing relationship?
It's, like I said, the concept isn't new. I think it's bringing awareness to a lot that don't know about it, but then also letting them know who we are. That's been in my first 4 or 5 months here, because they talk to the other companies that do outsourcing, but the single compliment that we get the most is the team. It's, wait a minute, you've built teams. Not everyone else can say that. So I think that brings a lot of value to a company, whether they work with us or not. We talk through things and make suggestions and go from there.
So what would your, I guess, maybe 2 or 3 things that you think that freight brokerages need to be thinking about? New Year's coming up, 2024. People are probably already budgeting and planning for it and putting those things in place. What should they be thinking about? With all of your experience in the freight brokerage world, now with your outsourcing experience, what should be some of those top things that freight brokerages should be thinking about if they want to survive through this tough market?
I want to be ahead of things. I think the typical cycle in our industry is 26 to 28 months. And I read that we're in month 22 right now. So it is coming, whether it's the beginning of 24 or middle of next year. It will change. And I think those who make changes now will kind of surge ahead of everyone when it does flip. I saw it flip many times over the years. And, there are good tech options out there. It's finding the right ones that fit your model. Don't just buy everything that's being sold out there. Find the right ones that fit your company's model and get the right people. And then when you do have the right people, do everything you can to keep them. They're few and far between.
Don't let them go, because they're the
Don't let
relationship
them go.
builders.
Yep.
We mentioned it earlier in the conversation.
Yes.
Walk that fine, balanced line of adopting technology, but also investing in your top people.
Yeah.
All right, Chris, anything else that you think is important to mention that we haven't already discussed?
No, it's great to talk to you. I just think that, like we said, it's changing. And I don't like seeing the companies going out of business. I don't like seeing the Convoy, although I'm happy about the Flexport rumors. I think that's a great fit for former Convoy employees and Flexport. So I hope that happens. But, I built my book on carrier relationships, and it's important to me. We're nothing without them. And I really think that we got to do everything we can to help them survive in a tough market.
Well, any tips on helping carriers also survive in a top market?
Just don't spend your time interviewing people like we talked about that might not be a good fit and will leave. There are options out there. Focus on driving revenue for your company. And then if you get savings, put that towards assets or more salespeople or whatever it may be, just to help you get through this, because it will flip again. And I think we're poised to see a surge next year.
Awesome. Well, I mean, great perspective, great insight. Chris, where can folks follow more of your work? Check out Zelh, all that good stuff.
Yeah, just www.zelh.com. And then, my email address is chris.fields@zelh.com. So happy to talk to anyone, and I want to help as many people as we can.
Perfect. Awesome. Yeah, they're going to need it heading into, 2024 with all the drama that's going on, but hopefully the dust is starting to settle a little bit.
I think so.
So, especially what was that comparison with like forest fires? Like sometimes you got to burn down the forest for the new growth to emerge.
There we go.
That's what we're witnessing now. So again, Chris, thank you so much for coming on the show, and I'll put all the links to contact you in the show notes.
Thanks, Blythe.